Vulnerability. One of our big problems in today's Western world is that we increasingly are lonely, depressed. All of the symptoms are a product of us not connecting deeply with others anymore. And part of that is being vulnerable. So when you go to a meeting or a networking or a friend's dinner or a party, it doesn't matter. You meet new people, and usually people kind of start off, and you see that especially in places like New York or London, like these big cities where everybody is competing, and the conversation usually starts like with what do you do, and then it's up to you to kind of impress the other person supposedly and say like how great you are and how successful you are, and you kind of build up that narrative, that identity that you might not really believe yourself, and that is actually only part of the whole picture, because of course there are lots of failures and mistakes and challenges in your story, but we kind of, most of us build this kind of narrative of kind of this shiny armor, and it is really an armor that we're building, a shield so to speak, to kind of show up in the world. But the problem is with the shield, it also not only protects us, but it kind of also isolates us from the world. So kind of we lost the human connection. Think about last time where you kind of deeply connected with someone. It's someone when you were vulnerable, when you kind of shared like something that happened to you, or you could support someone that shared such a story. And that kind of makes that deep human connection that makes you feel human, that makes you feel alive. Otherwise, you're kind of in this isolated, lonely, kind of armored, shielded self, and it just gets exhausting being always like this better person, this successful person. And that's why you have these stories of some of the most successful people committing suicide, etc., because they just couldn't get out of their world. They had to, especially successful people, they're constantly scrutinized by press and paparazzi and everything, and they kind of have to build up that narrative, that success. But in the meantime, every little detail gets squeaked out of them, and that's just so much pressure. That's one of the reasons why you don't want to be famous. And even though everybody wants to be famous, like it really has, I think, a lot of downsides. Anyway, we need more vulnerability. And the beauty is, just try the next time you start a conversation at a dinner party or so. You don't start how great you are and how successful and all the things, but you kind of start, first of all, with a different topic. Just discuss something else rather than what you do and who you are, or don't ask the other person who they are and what they do. And then kind of be more humble how you express things, and maybe start even talking about your failures. So for example, I something that often comes up to, one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing now is, I mean, of course many things happen in my life. One reason is probably the divorce of my parents that triggered certain things, and that taught me certain things. Another thing is the falling out of my former business partner and I, who left me with thinking a lot, like why things happened, what happened, what's the purpose of life, why did I try to run a company, build a company, all of these things. And so I wouldn't be here talking, and I wouldn't be out there helping people every day to live better, more successful, happier, healthier, all that lives, like really start living rather than just existing, if those things wouldn't have happened to me. So, and rather than saying, oh, I did like this super successful startup that at some point employed 120 employees that raised multi-million funding, that's one way of putting the story. The other side of the story is my co-founder and I had a huge falling out, which ultimately led to me leaving the company, but allowing me both, to move on financially as well as personally, and kind of go on this journey of now 5 years of self-exploration, which was incredible, and I'm so grateful for all of that happened. And so if you start a conversation more like that, that opens then the door for the other person also to open up and say, oh yeah, whatever it is, my parents also got divorced and I'm traumatized because of it, and the company I started completely failed, but I learned this and this of that, and you will have a completely different conversation with that person, a completely different connection, and you will walk away from that evening or from that conversation, like, feeling alive, like, finally I can, right? We have this desire to actually share our real life story and to be understood, but it's impossible if you're building up the shield and just because it's kind of, it goes up, right? If I start like how amazing I am and how great, and I'm flashing this light at you, and we just met, then you would feel like, oh, I'm not gonna open up and be vulnerable and like share my story. Now I also gonna say, oh yeah, I'm even more successful. And this is what we constantly do. And obviously also with things like social media and Facebook, we always see like, oh, it's like this incredible, beautiful world. People are so beautiful. They're always on holiday. They're always smiling. But then inside, they're depressed and sad. And it's so we only see part of the story, and then we think we also have to present that story. And so it becomes this inflationary process of everybody is so amazing, but actually everybody, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people feel shitty inside, and they would love to open up, but they cannot because we just don't allow. So someone has to do the first step, and that could be you. And the reward you will get is you will have a much deeper, much more rewarding, not only conversation but connection, and possibly make a new friend rather than exchange business cards. And so it's something really we have to relearn again as in the Western society, to kind of like deeply connect with people. And that starts with like kind of sharing who you really are, not what your Instagram, Facebook, or other feeds are saying. And once you do, it's really a beautiful. Actually, I was thinking about this topic today, to talk about this topic today, because I recently made a new friend, and she's also a coach and advisor, but in that process, she made something which she calls the 101 vulnerable moments, I think. And it was about her having conversations with strangers, a lot of kind of high profile, successful people that especially often are not showing vulnerability, because also it's harder to do that out of a position of success, because right, you're getting attacked from all the sides, there's competition everywhere, and so you need to keep up that shield. So they're especially prone not to be vulnerable, and so her challenge was to open up in a conversation to them, and then have them as a result obviously open it up as well. So she would be and so she did 101 conversations, so meaning for her to be authentic as well. Vulnerability is also closely related to being authentic. She had to obviously come up with new stories. So she couldn't always tell the same story 100 times. That wouldn't be authentic. That wouldn't be vulnerable, right? If you say like, oh, this thing happened to me, and then you say that 101 times, after the 10th time, it's kind of like, it's not being vulnerable anymore. It's just repeating. So that kind of pushed her to new limits, kind of to open up about stuff that she never talked about to a stranger, right? But that opens up an amazingly deep conversation, and obviously as a result, a stranger will also let go and start sharing. And so I encourage you to, this might be maybe too big of a step to start with kind of deep, vulnerable moments, but just to kind of be a bit more human, be a bit more less perfect, be a bit more like, oh yeah, this kind of happened to me, rather than like, oh, I'm this picture perfect, amazing person, when you're clearly not. None of us are. We all have these issues, and it's actually beautiful to be human and to share that with someone else, to share your story. And as a reward, you will get incredibly deep, empowering, beautiful conversation. You will connect with others like never before, and life will never be the same again.